Welcome to Almost Alone. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe. And if you've been listening for a while, thank you. When you share a living space with someone, you trust them by default. You learn each other's routines. You hear each other move through the dark. Most of the time, the person in the next room is just a person. These two stories are about the exceptions. One man answered a room listing and slowly realized the person he was living with had never planned to treat him like a tenant. One woman posted a listing and didn't understand, until it was nearly too late, that the person who responded hadn't been looking for a room at all. Both got out. Both will tell you luck had more to do with it than anything else. Let's begin. I'm 32 now. This happened when I was 28, about 4 years ago, and I still think about it more than I'd like to admit. I'd just taken a job in a city I didn't know well. Not a huge city, the kind of place with a real downtown, a few decent neighborhoods, parking meters on the main streets, a bus system that actually worked if you learned the routes. I'd relocated for the position and needed a place fast. My company gave me 2 weeks of hotel, and I spent most of that time on my laptop trying to find somewhere to live before the clock ran out. I was on a tight budget. Entry-level salary, student loans, first and last month's rent all at once. I'd been scrolling through listings for days when I found one that seemed almost too good. Furnished room in a quiet neighborhood. Utilities included. Month-to-month lease. The price was low enough that I read the post twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood something. I sent a message that night. The woman who responded was named Carol. She called instead of texting, which I remember finding slightly formal. Her voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice that gives you the impression of someone who chooses their words carefully. She asked a few questions. What did I do for work? Did I smoke? Did I have pets? Did I have people over often? I said no to most of it. I was new to the city, didn't know anyone yet. She said that was fine. She said she valued quiet. We arranged to meet the following afternoon. The house was a narrow 2-story on a street of similar houses, older, well-kept. Carol answered the door before I knocked. I assumed she'd seen me coming up the walk. She was probably late 40s, small, with short gray-streaked hair, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She shook my hand and showed me in. The room was on the second floor. Decent size. A bed, a dresser, a small desk, a window that looked out over the side yard. Furnished like the listing said. It had the feel of a room that had been occupied before. Not in a bad way. Just that lived-in quality that comes from years of use rather than staging. I said it looked good. Carol nodded and said she had a few house rules she liked to go over. She had a printed page, single-spaced. I remember thinking that was a little unusual, but I told myself some people were just organized. The rules were specific. No guests without 48 hours written notice, via text. Kitchen closed after 10 p.m. She said she was a light sleeper, and noise carried from downstairs. No television above a certain volume after 6 in the evening. She was up at 4 in the morning, she said, early shift. Needed to be in bed by 8 most nights. She said this like it was a hardship she'd learned to accommodate, something she'd explained many times before. I did the math in my head. It was controlling, but I needed a place, and the price was right, and I figured I could adjust my habits. I signed the lease that evening. The first week was fine. I barely saw her. I left early for work, came home tired, ate in my room, went to bed. Carol's light was on when I got home and off by the time I went to sleep. I told myself the rules were annoying but manageable. I told myself I was lucky to have found the place. It was during the second week that I started noticing things. I worked from home 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Fridays. Those days, I was in the house all morning, and I started to realize that Carol's car never moved before noon. Not once. I could see it from my window, parked at the same angle, in the same spot on the street, and it just sat there. Some mornings I watched it for an hour, for no real reason except that something about it bothered me. She was supposed to be up at 4 in the morning, supposed to work early shifts, but the car never left. I started thinking about the other rules differently. No television after 6. Kitchen closed after 10. No guests. If she wasn't sleeping, if there was no early shift, then what were the rules actually for? They controlled the noise I made. They limited when I'd be comfortable moving through the shared parts of the house. They kept me in my room, in the evenings especially, in the dark hours when I couldn't see what she was doing or where she was. I told myself I was reading into it, finding patterns in nothing. Then I found the note. I'd been there about 3 weeks. I was reorganizing the dresser, the furnished one that had come with the room, moving things around to make better use of the drawers. I pulled the bottom drawer all the way out to adjust the runner, and when I flipped it over to set it down, I saw something taped to the underside, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, taped carefully, like someone had wanted to make sure it stayed. I peeled it off and unfolded it. The handwriting was small and hurried, like someone writing fast. It said, "You don't know me. I had this room before you. Check under her bed before you decide to stay. I'm not crazy. I just wish someone had told me." No name, no date, no number. I read it 3 times. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a while. The rational part of my brain offered explanations. A prank, a previous tenant with a grudge, someone who'd had a bad experience with a difficult landlord and wanted to cause problems. The note proved nothing. It didn't even say anything specific, but I couldn't dismiss it. The drawer had been in this room through multiple tenants. Whoever left that note had taken the time to hide it carefully, to tape it so it would stay, in a place where only the next person to clean out the dresser would find it. They hadn't just vented. They'd planned it. They'd left it for someone they'd never meet. And they hadn't said check her room, or check her desk, or check her closet. They'd said check under her bed. That specificity was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. I needed to get into her room. The problem was Carol. She was almost always home. Even on days when her car was gone, which was rare, I could never be sure how long she'd be out, or whether she'd turn around for something she forgot. I thought about it for 2 days before I decided to try. The first opportunity came on a Tuesday evening. I heard the shower running. I figured I had a few minutes, maybe more if she washed her hair. I went into the hallway, moved to her door, put my hand on the knob. The shower cut off. I was back in my room with the door pulled shut before she opened the bathroom door. I sat at my desk and stared at my laptop screen without reading anything on it. My heart was going faster than it should have been. Through the wall, I heard her moving around, then nothing. I waited another hour before I let myself breathe normally. The second chance came about a week later. Carol mentioned, casually, at the kitchen counter, in that measured way she had, that she needed to pick up a prescription. It was the first time I'd heard her voluntarily announce she was leaving the house. I watched from the upstairs window. Her car pulled away from the curb. I gave it 2 full minutes, counting in my head before I moved. Her bedroom door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. It was tidy, spare. I didn't stop to look at anything. I went straight for the bed and crouched down. There was a shoebox, pushed toward the center, not quite at arm's reach. I pulled it out and lifted the lid. That's when I heard the car, the sound of tires on the gravel at the end of the driveway, the engine dropping in pitch as it slowed. I shoved the box back under the bed, stood up, and was in the hallway pulling her door shut behind me before I heard her key in the front lock. I made it to the bathroom, the closest door, and turned the faucet on. When I came out, she was standing in the kitchen below, still in her coat. She looked up at me. "Thought I heard you up there," she said. "Just washing up," I said. She looked at me for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Then she turned away and started taking off her coat. I don't know if she noticed anything. I have no way of knowing. But the way she looked at me, flat, patient, like she was filing something away, stayed with me for the rest of the day. I needed another opportunity. I needed one I could control. I started paying attention to what made her leave voluntarily. The prescription trip had been the only one I'd observed. One evening I mentioned, conversationally, a restaurant I'd passed near downtown. Said I'd heard good things about it. She said she didn't really go out much for dinner. I let it drop. A few days later, I tried something smaller. I left a grocery list on the kitchen counter: milk, bread, a few other basics, and mentioned at breakfast that I had a work call I couldn't move. Said I'd meant to go yesterday. She looked at the list, then at me. "I can go," she said. "I need a few things anyway." I thanked her, said she didn't have to. She said it was fine. I watched her car pull out of the driveway from the upstairs window. I waited 3 minutes this time, long enough for her to be at least several blocks away. Then I went back into her room. The shoebox was still there, pushed toward the center, just where I'd found it. Inside was not what I expected. I think part of me had been hoping to find something I could dismiss. Old mail, keepsakes, the kind of personal clutter that feels private but explains itself. Instead, what I found looked like the inside of someone's head exerting pressure from the outside. There were handwritten pages, not in a notebook, just loose sheets, dense with small writing. There were printed photographs, some blurry, like they'd been taken through a window or from a distance. There was a lease agreement with a name I didn't recognize on it, a folded piece of paper that, when I opened it, turned out to be a daily log. Times, observations, single-sentence notes about someone's behavior, someone's routine. And tucked beneath all of it, in a section that felt more recent than the rest, was a set of pages with my name at the top. 3 weeks of entries, my schedule, when I left for work, when I came home, what I ordered for dinner one night when I'd called someone, that I worked from home on Wednesdays and Fridays, that I didn't seem to have close friends in the city yet. That last line was underlined. I sat there on the floor of her room holding those pages, and I felt something I still don't have the right word for. Not fear exactly. More like the moment you realize you've been standing on ice that's been cracking for a long time, and you just didn't know it yet. I put everything back exactly as I found it and went to my room. I packed a bag that night. Not everything, just what I needed. Laptop, charger, a few days of clothes, my documents. I waited until I heard the sound of the television in her room, that low murmur she kept it at after 10. Then I went downstairs, unlocked the front door carefully, and left. I stayed with a coworker for a week. I didn't explain much, just said my living situation had fallen through. He didn't push. I called the non-emergency police line the next morning. An officer took down what I said, told me she hadn't technically committed a crime, and said they could do a welfare check. I said fine. They went. She was home, cooperative, said I'd left without notice and she wasn't sure why. The officer called me back and said there wasn't much they could do. I didn't fight it. I already had what I needed. About 6 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a man, older, formal, identifying himself as the property owner. He said he was reaching out to former tenants because Carol had been removed from the property. He didn't go into detail. He asked if I'd had any concerns during my time there. I told him yes. He listened without interrupting. Before he hung up, he said something I've thought about many times since. He said when they cleared her room, they found a lot of paperwork going back a long time. He said it like he expected me to understand what that meant without him having to say it. I did. A few months after that, I mentioned the address to someone at work, a woman who'd grown up in that neighborhood. She went quiet for a second, then said she actually knew that house. Said a guy she'd gone to college with had rented a room there years back. Said he was quiet, kept to himself, and then one day just stopped responding to messages. Didn't show up to plans. She'd assumed he'd moved away without saying goodbye. She never heard from him again. I didn't tell her what I'd found in that shoebox. I didn't know what to say that would make it land the right way. I just nodded and changed the subject and thought about that lease agreement with the name I didn't recognize. Whether it was his, whether he'd been the one who left the note. But I think about that person sometimes. Whoever wrote the note and taped it to the bottom of the dresser drawer, whether they got out the same way I did, whether they were trying to warn the next person because they knew somehow that there would be one. I hope they're all right. I don't know that they are. I'm 30 now. This happened about 2 years ago, when I was still in the apartment I'd been in since grad school, a 2-bedroom with more space than I needed, and rent that had gone up enough that I'd started doing the math. The second bedroom was actually a converted office, not huge, but big enough. A closet, a window, real walls. I figured I could rent it out for enough to make a dent in what I was paying, and I'd barely have to change how I lived. I'd had the place to myself for 3 years at that point. It wasn't that I needed a roommate. I just needed the math to work. I put a listing on Craigslist in early spring, included photos, wrote a decent description, listed the utilities in the neighborhood. I got responses within the first day. Most of them I screened out quickly. Wrong budget, wrong vibe, something off in how they wrote. By the end of the first week, I had 4 people I was willing to meet. Daniel was the last one I interviewed, and by then I was tired of the process. He came on a Thursday evening. Mid-30s, I'd guess, neatly dressed, collared shirt, dark jeans. The kind of outfit that reads as trying without being obvious about it. He was polite, soft-spoken, asked reasonable questions about the apartment, the neighborhood, the lease terms. He worked remotely, he said. Software, no pets, no girlfriend. He called himself low maintenance and smiled when he said it, like he'd said it before and knew it landed well. Something about him was slightly formal, the way he held himself, the way he answered questions with a little more precision than the situation required. But I didn't read that as a problem. Some people are just careful. I ran his references and they checked out. He moved in 2 weeks later. The first few days were unremarkable. He kept his door closed, was quiet in the mornings, did his dishes. I barely knew he was there. I told myself I'd made a good choice. Then the small things started. The first one I noticed was at the end of his second week. I'd mentioned to a friend on the phone, I was in my room, door closed, that I had a dentist appointment that Thursday. I hadn't said anything to Daniel. I hadn't written it on the calendar we kept in the kitchen. I just said it on the phone, offhand. Thursday afternoon, when I came back home, he was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up and said, "How'd the appointment go?" I said, "Fine." I didn't think about it right away. Later that night, I turned it over in my mind. I hadn't told him. The walls in that apartment were thin. I knew that. I'd lived there long enough. But I'd been in my room with the door shut, and I hadn't been speaking loudly. I convinced myself he must have overheard something, or that I'd mentioned it and forgotten. A few days after that, I noticed my shampoo had been moved. Not taken. Moved. Rotated on the shelf so the label faced a different direction. I use the same shampoo every day. I know where it sits. I told myself I must have done it. Then my friend came over for dinner one evening. He came out of his room while we were in the kitchen, said hello, got a glass of water, went back. Perfectly pleasant. But afterward, my friend said something I couldn't shake. She said he was a little strange. When I asked what she meant, She said she couldn't place it exactly, just that the entire time he was in the room, he never looked at her once. Not unfriendly, not distracted. He just didn't look at her. His eyes went to me and stayed there. I thought about that on the walk home, about the dentist appointment, about the shampoo. I started paying more attention after that. I began noticing that he always seemed to be home when I got there, even when I came back at odd hours. A late grocery run, a weeknight dinner that went long. I'd never once unlocked my front door to a dark, quiet apartment. He was always there. I told myself he worked from home, that it made sense, but I started tracking it in my head anyway, noting the times. He was always there. One night I came home after midnight. I'd been at a friend's birthday, later than I'd planned. And when I pushed open the front door, his light was on under his bedroom door. Same as always. I stood in the entryway, in the dark for a moment and thought, does he ever sleep? And then a worse thought, or does he just wait? Around the third week, I was on the phone with my mom. I was in my bedroom, door closed, voice low. I'd started doing that without really thinking about it, keeping calls private, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. I was telling her about a work trip coming up, a conference across the country, 4 days. I hadn't mentioned it to Daniel. When I came out of my room the following morning, he was already in the kitchen. He handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You should check the weather for your trip. Heard there's a system moving in out west." I stood there holding the mug. I hadn't told him I was traveling. The call with my mom had been in my bedroom with the door closed, voice low. He'd been in his room. I said thanks and went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The following week, I was straightening up the bathroom and found something in the trash can beside the sink. A hair tie, the thin elastic kind, the type I use. I don't keep extras in the bathroom. I wear my hair up at home, but the ties I use stay in my room, in a dish on my dresser. I'd had the same system for years. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd change without noticing. I stood there holding it and thought about how it could have gotten there. I went through every explanation I could think of. None of them satisfied me. A few days later, I was coming down the hallway in the afternoon when I noticed his bedroom door was open. Not wide, maybe an inch or two. He wasn't home. I slowed as I passed it. Through the gap I could see his desk. On it, open to a page, was a notebook. I couldn't read it from where I was standing, but I could see that the page had a structure to it. Not notes, not a to-do list, but something with consistent formatting. Columns maybe, or dated entries. I kept walking. I wish I hadn't, because he came home an hour later, and I never got another chance to look. And whatever was on that page, whatever he'd been writing in his room every evening while I watched television and made dinner and assumed I was alone, I never found out. I still think about that sometimes. What was on that page? That evening I called my friend and told her about the list of things I'd been dismissing. She listened until I finished and said, "How much do you actually know about him?" I said I'd run his references, a former co-worker and a property manager from his last place. She asked if I'd searched him beyond the basics. I had, but only lightly. LinkedIn, an old Facebook profile. Nothing alarming. That night I dug deeper. I went through every search variation I could think of. His name, and the city he'd said he was from. His name and the company he claimed to work for. The company checked out. Everything checked out. I started to feel like I was catastrophizing. Then I searched his name and the name of my neighborhood specifically. Not the city, just the neighborhood. I found a community forum post from about 2 months earlier. Someone asking if anyone had noticed a man sitting in a parked car on a specific block several evenings in a row. They described the car. They described the man, vaguely. the way you describe someone you've glimpsed from a distance. But the details matched him. Height, build, the way he dressed. That block was mine. I sat back from my laptop. My block, 2 months ago, before he ever responded to my listing, before I'd even posted it. I'd put the listing up in early spring. The forum post was from January. I kept looking. Found another post, a different platform, from around the same time. Someone had asked in a local group whether a certain building on my street had changed management because there was an unfamiliar car parked across from it most evenings. My building. There was a photo attached to the second post, taken from a window. The image was low quality, grainy from distance, and low light, but the car in it was a dark blue sedan, the same make and model as the one I'd watched Daniel park on the street every day since he moved in. He hadn't found me through my listing. He'd found me first. Somehow, some way, he'd found me first. And the listing was just the mechanism he'd used to close the distance. I thought about what to do for about 20 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called my brother. I told him I needed him to come over and that I'd explain when he got there. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He said he'd leave in 10 minutes. Daniel came home about an hour after that. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw my brother sitting at the table. Something behind his expression shifted, just slightly. He poured himself a glass of water, said hello to my brother. Then he looked at me. "Everything all right?" he asked. I said yes. I said I'd been meaning to talk to him, though. Said I'd been thinking about the room, about the arrangement, and I thought it wasn't going to work out. He set the glass down. "You went through my things," he said. Not a question. No anger in it. Just a flat statement, the way you'd confirm a fact. I didn't answer. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I figured this wouldn't last long." He said it the way someone says something they've said before. Not bitterly, just with the tired resignation of someone who'd done this enough times to know how the ending went. He was gone by morning, left the key on the counter, took everything he'd brought, which hadn't been much. No confrontation, no messages after. I called the police the next day. They were polite and mostly unhelpful. No crime had been committed. He'd paid rent and left peacefully. I gave them the forum posts, described the car. The detective listened, wrote things down, asked if I'd noticed a car parked near my building before he moved in. I said I hadn't. Then I thought about it more carefully. There had been a dark sedan I'd noticed a few times, parked down the block. Spring, maybe even late winter. I thought it belonged to someone visiting a neighbor or someone who worked nearby. I thought nothing of it. The detective asked me to describe it. I did. She asked how long it had been there. I said I honestly couldn't remember when I'd first noticed it. I said I'd stopped seeing it around the time a new tenant moved in across the street, so I'd assumed it was theirs. That would have been February or March, months before he responded to my listing. She wrote that down. She called me back 2 days later. She said they'd looked into him and couldn't find anything that gave them grounds for further action. She said she'd keep the file open. She said I'd done the right thing by calling. I thanked her and hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time. That was the part that stayed with me more than anything else. Not the confrontation, not the forum posts, not even the notebook open on his desk. It was that question, how long had the car been there? Because I'd been living in that apartment for 3 years, and somewhere inside those 3 years, I don't know which week, which month, he had started watching me. Long enough before the listing that I couldn't even identify the beginning. And then I remembered something. The previous fall, September, maybe October, I'd been coming home from the grocery store one evening, and I passed a car parked at the end of my block. There was a man in the driver's seat. He wasn't on his phone. Wasn't looking at anything in particular. Just sitting there facing forward, like he was waiting for something. I remember glancing at him and feeling a flicker of something I couldn't name, and then I walked into my building and forgot about it entirely. I can't be certain it was him. I never got a clear look. But the car was dark blue, and the posture, still, patient, settled in, matched everything I came to know about the way he existed in a space. That was at least 5 months before he moved in. He hadn't been looking for a room. He'd been looking for a way in. And posting that listing, putting my name and my address and my photo on a public page, and inviting strangers to come look at where I lived, had given him exactly what he needed. I moved out 8 months later, when my lease ended. The apartment had stopped feeling like mine. Every room had been seen by him. Every corner had been his to walk through. I'd scrubbed the bathroom 3 times in the weeks after he left, and it still felt like something that needed to be cleaned. I think about that every time I see a roommate ad now. The information those listings contain, the access they offer, how easy it is to mistake selection for safety just because the person sitting across from you seems like the right kind of ordinary. He was the right kind of ordinary. That's what made it work. And that's what I still can't fully get past. Not the ending, which was fine, which was as fine as those things get. Beginning. Part I'll never know. The moment he first decided, before I ever posted anything, before he ever sent a message, that I was the person he was going to be close to. I have no idea when that was. I just know it was before I knew his name. 2 stories. 2 people who let someone in, one by choice, one by necessity, and both of whom spent weeks inside the same quiet wrongness before they understood what was actually happening. Neither of them was careless. Neither of them was naive. They did the things you're supposed to do: check references, trust your instincts, follow the lease. And it still almost wasn't enough. That's what makes these stories hard to sit with. There's no lesson that fully protects you. There's no checklist that guarantees the person on the other side of your door is who they say they are. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes someone leaves a note in the bottom of a dresser drawer. If you've had an experience that still sits with you, something that happened in a place that was supposed to be safe, you can share it through the link in the description. Your story might be in a future episode. Thank you for listening to Almost Alone. Stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.